Chapter 15. Chang. Flip the New Year. Surfing the Island Vibe. Through the sunset of hope, like the shapes of a dream, what paradise islands of a glory gleam. Percy Bysshe Shelley. There's something primal, even prehistoric, in our brains that lights up when we lay eyes on that classic tropical postcard. White sand so powdery it squeaks underfoot. Coconut palms leaning like they've had one too many and are posing for a rum ad. Sea grapes huddled near the edge of the dune, and that impossible iridescent blue water that looks like it was poured straight out of an Adobe gradient tool. It's a hardwired version to hijack our modern overclocked minds. One glimpse and suddenly the fantasy switch flips. Quit the job, hurl the phone into the surf, and move into a bamboo hut with Ginger. Gilligan's our harmless, clueless neighbor. Ukulele music drifts lazily on the breeze, and a deeply tanned local keeps appearing with bottomless pina coladas, icy lagers, and the catch of the day on a banana leaf. Tropical islands like Koh Chang know exactly what they're doing. They've weaponized leisure. They seduce you with simplicity. Your brain, accustomed to stress and schedules, gets chloroformed by salt air and fried bananas and wakes up believing this is how life is meant to be lived. You find yourself seriously weighing life decisions based on hammock angle, depth of the beach chair recline, and whether flip-flops are necessary at all. And in that suspended haze of sun and sea, for a few blessed moments, you don't just fantasize about a simpler life. You live it. Gauguin heard that call loud and clear and followed it all the way to Tahiti, paintbrush in one hand, delusion in the other. He paid for his libertine lifestyles with regret and syphilis, dying in paradise an embittered curmudgeon, ignoring the beauty, embracing his madness. For me, the call came in the form of Koh Chang, Elephant Island, named after its headland which, from the right angle, and maybe a cocktail or five, looks vaguely like an elephant. Real elephants? Yes, a few. Imported, of course, for the tourists. Wild elephants haven't called this place home in a very long time, if they ever did. That was where I spent the flip from 2024 to 2025. A desperate escape from Bangkok's concrete energy and neon noise. I didn't want the new year to catch me in the tangle of tuk-tuks and techno beats. Malaya, friend, international traveler, and fellow avoidance pro of citywide parties, was flying in to join me. A marathon of fireworks, endless shots and drinks, the screaming woos wasn't her idea of a great evening either. Yeah, great. You can count down from 10. Welcome to the party, baccalaureate. We both wanted something quieter, a softer entry into the new year. In my younger days, New Year's Eve meant the Grateful Dead's winter run, San Francisco or Oakland, depending on the year. 5 shows and 6 nights, and the new year always began with a hangover that lasted until mid-January. I've aged out of that particular ritual and had done so in the late 1980s. These days, a gentle countdown somewhere warm and semi-conscious sounded just about right. I handed off the planning to Malaya. No questions asked. She's the kind of traveler who can navigate immigration lines and ferry schedules like she's playing a casual game of Tetris, so it seemed smart to step aside and let her do her thing. My only job was to set up base camp in Bangkok, a comfortable landing pad where she could shake off the jet lag before we made the move south. I hadn't mentioned anything about Charlie to Malaya. Charlie and I wouldn't be together on New Year's, so it didn't seem necessary. Since Malaya and I weren't romantically involved, there was no reason to complicate things. By early December, our inboxes were filling up with back and forth lists. How about this? What about that? Each message a negotiation towards somewhere that wasn't a human traffic jam with a beach. We both knew what we didn't want. Phuket, Koh Samui, Pattaya, any of the usual suspects. Gorgeous? Yes. But come New Year's Eve, they turn into neon and day-glow soaked frat parties with sand. Thousands of tourists all chasing the same authentic island experience, hooting into the night like it's their first time drinking from a bucket. No thanks. I opened up her latest email in early December. Chang, Trot Province. A quieter island tucked into the eastern curve of the Bay of Thailand, close to Cambodia and far from the blow-up flamingo scene. The main island is the anchor of Mu Ko Chang National Park, established in 1982 as a maritime preserve covering a 52-island archipelago, scattered like green coins floating atop tropical blue water. Technically, the park designation for the Big Island was mostly symbolic, more a gesture than a guarantee, but I wasn't about to split hairs. Everything I read told me it was still lush, still wild in places, and most importantly, still free of the kind of infrastructure that turns paradise into parking lots. No major cities, no super clubs with DJ foam parties, no five-star resorts with authentic cultural shows. However, there are towns with restaurants, pot shops, bars, and DJ clubs dotted along the eastern coast of the island, but in microscopic ratios compared to the other tourist spots. My deep sadness that Charlie would not be with me had been tempered by my own enthusiasm for my adventure, long planned before we met. Don't get me wrong, we were pining for each other in the worst way, not only for the intimacy that had blossomed, but for the genuine friendship that goes along with anything real. Chang sounded exactly like what we were after. A tropical island that doubles as a national park? Yes, please. Snorkeling and jungle hikes, warm Gulf water you can float in all day, seafood dinners eaten barefoot, umbrella drinks that arrive slightly too strong, and long, slow naps on feather-soft sand. The plan was coming together, and my optimism was cautiously creeping toward excitement. December 28th, just past 12:30 a.m., I was outside Suvarnabhumi Airport, waiting for Malaya to clear customs. The air was warm and thick, like the city hadn't exhaled the remnant heat of the day yet. I didn't want her navigating the cab alone after all the effort she'd put into planning our adventure, so I waited out front, loitering near the cluster of private drivers in dark slacks and white shirts. The drivers and I shared a few laughs, swapping half-English jokes and pretending not to sweat. Finally, at 1:15 a.m., she emerged from the sliding glass doors, backpack slung, carry-on rolling behind, and smile intact. We slid into the waiting car and headed back to the Sunreno. The upside of landing in the dead of night? No traffic. During daylight, Bangkok's highways swell with enough cars to make 17 miles feel like 60. At this hour, the city slipped past the windows, silent and dark. We would have a nap till dawn, and then our one full day and night in Bangkok before heading right back to the airport for the 45-minute flight to Trot. From there, we'd arrange door-to-door transport. Someone would meet us at the airport, drive onto the ferry, and deliver us to the hotel on Koh Chang. The whole journey from Bangkok to beach would take about 6 hours. Manageable, especially with someone else behind the wheel. I'd made a conscious decision to stop Googling everything. No more photos or TripAdvisor rabbit holes. I wanted to arrive with fresh eyes, no script, no expectations. Just the simple thrill of stepping onto a new island and letting it hit me in real time. Our full day in Bangkok turned out to be a good one. I spent most of it texting back and forth with Charlie, keeping the thread going while Malaya and I played tourist. We hopped on the Chao Phraya ferry and let it carry us downriver, sightseeing like pros. See? I can learn. We wandered through the exhibits at the National Museum, took in the reclining Buddha at Wat Pho, and spent the rest of the afternoon bouncing around town, eating, drinking, and half distracted by the anticipation of sand and sailing just over the horizon. That night, we made the responsible decision to have an early dinner and crash early. No big bar night, just sleep so we could face the morning without stress or rushing. We dined at an Irish pub. I was craving Guinness. That was nothing special, but the stout was fantastic. I'd been at the Sunreno Hotel for 11 days. I'd made friends and explored the local surrounds. Both doormen, Wing and Cheepak, had turned into allies and advisors. They'd been endlessly kind, always ready with directions, local wisdom, and Thai language coaching. Of course, there was Charlie and Jacopon, too, and it was a wrench to leave them behind. The Sunreno had become familiar, like Martin's recliner in Frasier. Not glamorous, but solid and strangely hard to leave. But new horizons were calling. So, after some genuinely heartfelt goodbyes and a few awkward Thai phrases, we loaded into an early morning cab and said adios to Bangkok for a week. It was odd, though. Aside from the obvious and desperate need to stay and remain with Charlie, I felt Bangkok slipping her tentacles around me, grasping, sucking, whispering, "Where the hell do you think you're going? We're not done here yet. Not by a long shot." The little prop plane was packed, every seat taken, but thankfully the flight was merely a hop. The taxi to takeoff in Bangkok was longer than the airtime itself. As we began our descent, the view outside was already leaning hard into tropical fantasy. Patches of green jungle, swaths of fields growing yummy things, and not a single glossy high rise in sight. Trot Airport was exactly what I hoped it would be: tiny, rustic, and blessedly free of anything resembling a security checkpoint. There was a dog giving us the once over, but I wasn't sure if that counted, as he looked like he was trying to find a place to pee rather than anyone for contraband. A single two-lane runway, a cabana-style terminal no bigger than a 7-Eleven, and the kind of relaxed atmosphere that made you wonder if anyone here had even heard of the word security protocol. We climbed down the steps from the plane onto the tarmac and boarded one of those open-air buses you usually see at amusement parks, each bench seat with its own side entry for the grand 1-minute ride to the terminal. Our bags showed up a few minutes later in the bed of a pickup truck, where a genial fellow unloaded them by hand onto a shaded patio. Security consisted of walking through an open doorway into a parking lot. Outside, a driver stood holding a handwritten sign with my name on it. That's how you land in paradise. The ride to the ferry terminal took half an hour, winding through rural back roads that felt a world apart from Bangkok sprawl. Out the van window, we watched the land roll past in a patchwork of agricultural plots. Pineapple fields with their spiky blue-green punk hairdos, papaya trees leaning under their heavy fruit, stretches of neon yellow-green sugarcane, mango, rubber, and dense tea plantations. Everything was green and quietly industrious. Every so often we passed a roadside stall or an isolated shop. Hand-painted signs, plastic chairs out front, the roar of an old refrigerator compressor audible over the sound of the tires on cracked asphalt. We passed clusters of greenhouses, too, tucked back behind thickets of palms, and through the van's windows were only slightly ajar. The unmistakable scent of skunk crept in. Someone was growing something pungent in bulk out there. There was no doubt we were off the beaten track. This wasn't glossy brochure Thailand. No trot area tours, no billboards for elephant rides, no golden arches or red and white striped chicken buckets. Just farmland and jungle and the slow, steady pulse of a place unbothered by time. Pulling up to the ferry dock felt like entering some forgotten outpost. The parking lot was a messy sprawl of dirt, gravel, and crumbling asphalt, patched and repatched until the concept of paved was more philosophical than practical. It was packed with cars and trucks and no fewer than 20 of those silver Toyota commuter vans you see everywhere in Thailand. Little human cargo ships, each one crammed with sunseekers and island dreamers. The dock itself looked like it had been through a war, or simply decades of tropical wear and salted neglect. Rusted steel beams, block and tackle that looked like it would collapse with the weight of a crate of mangoes, bent railings, concrete that appeared to have been chewed up by a giant. Nothing about it inspired confidence, and neither did the ferries, which floated low in the water with the kind of weary dignity usually reserved for old men playing chess in a park. Still, this was clearly a well traveled route. Tourists, travelers, and locals alike streamed aboard without hesitation, chatting, snapping photos, buying last minute snacks. I tried not to think about the structural integrity of the vessel or the possibility of its rusted siblings already decorating the seafloor. Instead, I chalked it up to Southeast Asian providence. If the ferry hadn't sunk yesterday, odds were good it wouldn't sink today. I had a quiet chat with my inner Buddha and left the rest to chance. Chang, visible from the opposing dock, slowly swelled larger as our ferry, which I had dubbed the SSOMG, chugged and sputtered its way across the Bay of Thailand. The vessel belched diesel fumes like it had a 5 pack a day habit and was just trying to make it to retirement without any major incidents. It wasn't the kind of boat you'd bet money on in rough seas, but the Gulf was calm, the sky was clear, and I was trusting in the magic of repeated success. Up on deck was a blender bar selling fresh fruit smoothies. I ordered watermelon. Malaya got mango, and we leaned on the railing, sipping our drinks, watching the island grow larger and more beautiful by the minute. There's something about drinking a cold smoothie on a warm sea that briefly makes you believe you've figured some parts of life out. Despite the SSOMG's tendency to wheeze and groan like an asthmatic lawnmower on its last legs, the trip felt more reassuring with every nautical mile. By the time we neared the dock on the opposite shore, I had mostly stopped wondering how long I could tread water if we sunk. When we finally pulled in and the ferry creaked into the dock, I felt a wave of honest to God relief wash over me. My neck unknotted, my shoulders released their death grip on my ears, and I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. We'd made it. Chang was real, and we were there. The other passengers in our van were all headed to White Sand Beach, the busiest tourist enclave on the island, a place known for its tourist bars, smallish late night dance clubs, beach chairs, and general overabundance of things. As they were being dropped off two by two, I realized we'd be the last to go. Kai Bay was farther down the island's curving spine, tucked along the less congested southeast coast. That suited me just fine. It meant we'd get a rolling introduction to Chang, an informal windshield tour of our place that I'd never set foot on. We curved up, down, and around the narrow coastal road that twisted through pockets of jungle, then opened up to sudden breath-catching sea views. Corrugated metal shacks gave way to palm-thatched cafes, then shops with handwritten signs. Every so often a dog trotted casually across the road just to make sure we weren't speeding. It was the kind of drive that required no conversation except the occasional, "Whoa, look at that," as the island revealed itself in bits and pieces. Malaya had booked us into the Kai Bay Beach Grand View, a not-so-modest spot with a prime location. I'd only given it the briefest of once-overs online when she'd sent the reservation, just enough to confirm it wasn't a hostel with a thatched roof and bunk beds made from driftwood. But otherwise, I'd kept myself willingly in the dark. I wanted this whole thing: Chang, the beach, the bungalow, the sunsets, to arrive fresh and unfiltered. No predefined expectations, no mental Pinterest board. Just the real thing, as it came to me on its own terms. Somewhere along the way, in a dip between jungle and cliff, I spotted a Mackay monkey perched on the shoulder of the road, looking for all the world like a local, bored with the tourist traffic. He sat there casually, legs splayed, head bobbing back and forth like he was refereeing a tennis match. I'd never seen a monkey in the wild before, and that little scene, equal parts National Geographic and neighborhood gossip, cracked me up. It was a moment of pure, goofy delight, and I found myself hoping we'd see more simian spectators along the way. Maybe have a chat about roadside etiquette over a banana or two. We dropped off our fellow vanmates at hotels, guest houses, and modest resorts scattered around White Sand Beach. Then, with the last of them waved off, our van pointed its nose southward towards the smaller town of Kai Bay. As we rounded the final bend, the landscape opened up in a way that made both of us lean forward, silent. There it was. Kai Bay Beach Grand View. Whoever named it hadn't been exaggerating. The hotel sat right above sand and surf, with an unobstructed, cinematic view of three offshore islands lounging in the turquoise waters like cats napping on a vast blue blanket. Sunlight shimmered on the bay, refracting off the water in that way that makes you forget about luggage, logistics, or the need for shoes. My breath caught. I felt the primal urge to ditch everything and just bolt for the surf, fully clothed, like some semi rational castaway. I kept my cool. Barely. After a smooth check in at the open air lobby, we were led past a spacious deck with a massive infinity pool overlooking the Gulf. As we turned up a small path, our beachfront bungalow was the first in line. The bungalow, though, was a little more substantial than the word conjures. It was a new, modern design, sleek, clean, and perfectly integrated into the surrounding lush tropical landscape abutting the structure. Made of thick cement, it sported a soft hue of marshmallow and was shaped like a long, tall half tunnel. It was set back mere feet from a low beachfront bulkhead. The concierge unlocked the door with a flourish. The front door opened directly onto a long vista, drawing your eye past the bathroom and open closet and long desk to the right, with a resident gecko chirping and checking out the new occupants. Nice. We inherited a pet. I smiled. Inside was long and airy, flooded with sunlight, impeccably clean, and sparkling with the kind of freshness you only get in a well-looked-after place. The space was open, with the layout perfectly designed to take advantage of the bay and island views. Past the bedroom, a large glassed-in sitting area was at the far end. A floor-to-ceiling sliding glass wall framed the view, opening directly onto a small manicured lawn atop the bulkhead, just large enough for two lounge chairs and a small table. 7 cement steps led from the lawn down to the sand, framed by coconut palms, frangipani, naupaka, and pandanus. The afternoon sea was at its peak low tide, stretching out across the bay like an unbroken sheet of calm turquoise. Seabirds wove through the air and waited at the water's edge, while guests floated on rubber rafts or paddled kayaks, the occasional sailboarder cutting through the bay further out. Beyond them, a couple of pleasure cruisers slid slowly by, their passengers soaking in the tropical views. Despite the idyllic scene, it didn't feel overcrowded. Maybe 50 people total were scattered along the broad, lengthy beach, all enjoying the surf and sand in peaceful harmony. It was a picture-perfect postcard of tropical paradise. After we'd explored the well-appointed room and its luxurious, very modern bathroom, decked out with top-notch amenities, we couldn't resist. I swapped into trunks, Malaya slid into her swimsuit, and without so much as a glance at our bags, we made our way straight for the water. The sun was soft now, casting a golden sheen over everything as we waded out, which at low tide stretched seemingly to Hua Hin. We walked and walked until the water was deep enough to rise to our chests. I paused, looked back toward the shore, and took in the scene. that perfect poster-worthy vision of a tropical paradise, the kind you see in brochures, all azure waters and palms. It made me grin. Without another thought, I dove into the warm salt water, feeling it rush over me with glee. It had been years since I'd been in any ocean, and I reveled in briny liquid bliss. I'd be taking Charlie back there for sure. We swam another 100 yards out to a buoy, the water slightly cool yet clear, the kind that makes you forget about everything else. On the swim back in, I passed through a school of needlefish, their silver bodies flashing like lightning, each darting in perfect synchronicity. Just behind them, a school of cuttlefish, silent, ghostly, were on the hunt. I watched them in silent awe, half expecting a Sir David Attenborough narration to cut through the air. It felt almost absurd, the perfect slice of nature happening just under the surface. We rinsed off and got dressed. We tackled the essentials, unpacked the bare minimum, pretending to be motivated to do domestic, then made our way to the beachfront bar, just past the main lobby. Of course we did. We slid onto stools at the outside polished wood rail facing the bay, the sun now beginning to dip lower, painting the sky with the first streaks of pink and gold. We settled in, leisurely depleting their beer and scotch selections. As we caught up, sharing laughs and savoring the view, the world felt like it had slowed. Several drinks in and not wanting to be boorish newbie tourists who overdid it within their first hour, it was time for dinner. We strolled north on the beach to see what our dining options were because when you're in tropical paradise, there's always bars and restaurants on the beach. We stumbled upon KB Restaurant and Bar a half-mile up. It was one of those large open-air setups, a little too brightly lit with colored LED lights everywhere, draped and intertwined with a suspicious amount of holiday tinsel hanging down from and around every fixture and the bar. It felt like someone had taken a couple of party stores, thrown them into a blender, and shot the results into the bar from a t-shirt cannon. Normally, this would have been a red flag, the kind that makes you want to spin on your heels and leave immediately. But it was mid-evening on the New Year's holiday weekend, and from what we had been told, most of the party crowd had already migrated north to White Sand. That's where the live music and wild revelry were, with bars and clubs jumping and jiving into the early hours of the morning. As we waited, the sound of the surf crashing just 30 feet away made up the soundtrack to our meal. Calming, rhythmic, the kind of backdrop you only get when you are lucky enough to be on the beach at the right time. Dinner done and a few more drinks in us, we headed back to our bungalow, strolling slowly along the moonlit beach. The tide was still low, the sand firm and cool beneath our feet, rippled like corduroy from the receding waves. The occasional bit of driftwood or shell caught the light, but otherwise it was just the soft hush of the ocean, walking quietly in that shared silence that settles in when there's nothing left to plan. Back at number 8, we left the beachside glass doors ajar to let in the sounds of the sea, the gentle lapping of waves on shore, rhythmic and hypnotic, nature's lullaby. The air was warm with just a hint of salt, and the ceiling fan spun just enough to stir it around the room. A surefire way to drift off to sleep. And sure enough, within minutes, we were both out cold, carried off to dreamland to the rhythm of the tide. I awoke to sunshine pouring through the glass and the loud slap of waves crashing onto the shore. For a moment, I had no idea where I was, and where Charlie was. Everything came pouring back into focus as the roar of surf and blinding tropical light cleared up more of the fog in my head. I shuffled over to the sliding glass wall, still bleary, to see what high tide had dragged in. Not much, as it turned out. Just a lone coconut bobbing aimlessly in the current like it had missed its cue in some island-themed stage play. The Gulf waters lapped up upon the third step. The waves weren't large, but with the water line that close, they amplified into a surprisingly loud soundscape. Less gentle background music, more like a front row at a hippie drum circle. I watched the coconut get sucked sideways at a ridiculous speed, carried by a surprisingly aggressive riptide surging south. It spun once, like it was waving goodbye, then was gone. Morning swim? No. Not unless I wanted to end up halfway out into the middle of the Gulf of Thailand before breakfast. The day had started hot and heavy, humid enough to steam the glass if the doors hadn't already been cracked. It wasn't even mid-morning, and I could already feel the promise of a full body, pour cleansing sweat coming on. Tropical paradise? Yes, but the kind that doesn't let you forget your body's still got work to do. I chugged a body full of water to give my glands something to work with. Malaya spent the morning working on her laptop, juggling business emails and family calls via Zoom, so I parked myself in a lounge chair on the grassy patio, determined to match the color of the steamed crabs. The surf played against the beach like a metronome. Charlie and I texted back and forth until her ride showed up. She loved the pics I sent, and we promised to catch up as soon as she was safe at her family home. The waves continued to sink to the rhythm of the book I was reading, Bill Bryson's Dirt, Adventures in Lyon as a Chef in Training. A few hours drifted by in a loop of swimming against a strong current, sunning and flipping pages. Eventually, I dried off, threw on a shirt, and decided to explore Kai Bay town while Malaya took care of obligations. I strolled up and down the main road, taking in the usual island town suspects. Restaurants with laminated menus, bars pumping Bob Marley remixes, weed dispensaries, a handful of dive providers, and, of course, the ubiquitous 7-Eleven. There were also a few small goods shops crammed with knockoff Crocs, t-shirts, and mosquito repellent. The novelty wore off after about 30 minutes. Then I spotted something that made me do a double take. A Mexican restaurant called El Barrio Chang. Right there, in that sleepy village clinging to the edge of the Gulf of Thailand. Back home, the words Mexican restaurant often translates to Tex-Mex purgatory. Tortilla chips with all the taste and texture of overcooked pasta made from gap foam, insipid salsa, canned refried frijoles, and lumbering combo platters drenched in orange cheese and pools of oil. And don't forget the margarita slushies in colors not found in nature. Curious, I looked up the place online and was surprised to find a long list of reviews that rated El Barrio as not only the best restaurant on the island, but it was repeatedly mentioned as authentic Mexican cuisine. That earned it a second glance. I peered past dense tropical foliage and the open-air patio. Inside, it was beautifully designed. A warm jungle-like atmosphere with terracotta pots, what looked like genuine Talavera tile, and wall-covering hand-painted murals of Dia de los Muertos scenes that actually seemed authentic rather than kitsch. I was intrigued. Sitting at the bar, piles of paperwork spread out in front of him, making phone calls and writing checks, was the owner. He had that multitasking, mildly intense energy of someone who was keeping a thriving small business running in a place where supplies come by boat, elephant, or divine intervention. I grabbed a seat on the corner, out of his way, and glanced through the menu with cautious optimism, expecting a list of usual suspects with exotic-sounding names slapped onto tourist-friendly plates. But this wasn't that. The menu was lifted straight from the kitchens of Oaxaca, Puebla, and Jalisco. Ceviche made fresh, house-made tortillas, champin queso, tacos el pastor, pescado a la diabla, Real deal Mexican food. The kind you don't find without someone's abuela in the kitchen. I was more than intrigued. I was hopeful. I ordered the ceviche, chips and salsa, a pour of añejo tequila, and an ice cold tecate. The fellow at the bar wrapped up his invoices and supplier calls, tucked away his papers and checkbooks, and walked over. He asked how everything was and where I was from, an opener that was more curious than canned. His name was Julian, and he was from Mexico. He'd learned to cook at his mother's side, mi madre siempre, then honed his skills in professional kitchens across Mexico before heading to France to stage and cook. I told him about my travels through Mexico over the years, my admiration for its layered culture, bold art, and food that speaks in paragraphs, not just flavors. We shared a few laughs about travel stories that only seasoned wanderers of the width and breadth in Mexico and late night street taco stands could appreciate. Soon we were deep into conversation, riffing like two culinary nerds over mole sauces, regional ceviche variations, Pacific Coast seafood, the magic of a perfect street taco using blue maize, and the virtues of really good tequila and mezcal. It was the kind of talk that makes you forget where you are until you look up, realize you're in a Mexican jungle restaurant on an island surrounded by the Gulf of Thailand, and remember how weirdly wonderful the world can be. My food arrived, and with my first bite, I knew El Barrio was the real deal. No shortcuts, no lazy approximations, just honest, carefully crafted food that can only come from someone who knows what it's supposed to taste like. The ceviche was fantastic. Served cold, which on a hot, humid day is one of the most refreshing things you can eat. The crisp texture and clean flavors of freshly caught whitefish and shrimp shone through, balanced with a zip of onion and just enough lime to let the citric acid do its alchemy. A splashy mix of tomato and creamy avocado, finished with a tight blast of cilantro. It was simply a perfect ceviche. Fried tortilla chips came with 4 house-made salsas, each one a small triumph. A smoky chipotle, a fiery roasted tomato and red pepper, a tart tomatillo green, and a creamy queso dip. Spot on, authentic, all of them. Thanks, Quetzalcoatl. This was food I'd been missing, though didn't realize it until those sense memories came flooding back, transporting me across oceans to coastal villages and dark cantinas. There were details here, attention to ingredients, preparation, and presentation. But more than that, there was soul. You don't get those kinds of flavor profiles unless you've lived the food, unless it's tattooed into your sense memory from childhood. Julian was fun, gregarious, and full of island stories. Over the course of our chat, I learned about the local scene and the history of his restaurant. I ordered another tequila. Julian, being the kind of host who knows how to make people feel like regulars on their first visit, poured me a shot of his passion fruit infused tequila on the house. It was bright, smooth, and sneakily strong. If El Barrio was in my neighborhood, I'd be a regular. Texting Charlie with my review and pictures, she was excited to go back with me. She'd never been to Chang or tried Mexican cuisine. I was her recon. I boogied back to the bungalow to report my discovery. Malaya reminded me of her less than enthusiastic love of Mexican cuisine, even after I explained that El Barrio was the real deal, a genuine gem, regardless of geography. She smiled dubiously and returned to her work, though not before we wandered over to the hotel desk to book a snorkeling trip to the smaller islands in the national park for January 1st. A quiet night was on order. We grabbed pizza because it was easy, then picked up some extra munchies and a bottle of Sang Som Thai rum from a local curio shop that somehow managed to get everything just right. We lingered at the beach bar until closing, then made our way back to the bungalow for a swim. The night sky was alive. Stars blazed across the endless expanse above as I floated on my back in the warm water. A ghostly bioluminescence flickered from millions of tiny dinoflagellates along the surf line, as if they were trying to outshine the blazing stars above them. Far out in the Gulf, a few blazing lights marked the position of squid boats working the night shift for tomorrow's market. It was quiet, just the soft, barely there rippling of the surf as I drifted with the gentle current before I hit the shore. Charlie and I texted our deep love and sweet dreams to each other for the night. I headed to bed as the same soft surf sound dispatched me into dreamland. New Year's Eve day dawned. Malaya and I settled into a relaxed morning, deciding a hearty breakfast was in order. We walked the 8 minutes into town on a quiet, balmy morning, strolling through the small streets and alleys, only to find a ghost town. We forgot it was New Year's Eve day. Hey, give me a break. I was on vacation within a vacation. Plus, I had other things on my mind. Places that would normally be bustling with breakfast crowds were deserted, shuttered, as families took the morning off to unwind before the inevitable onslaught of the evening's holiday-fueled festivities. Eventually, we stumbled upon a small, funky resort at the tip of a tranquil inlet. We indulged in their breakfast buffet, which hit the spot perfectly. Fried chicken, eggs, wok-fried local fish, fresh fruit, pastries, salad, noodles, jock, juice, and coffee. While we were digging in, I struck up a conversation with a traveler who was wearing a travel-worn New Zealand silver fern t-shirt. He was from Austria and had been solo traveling around Asia for the past year. One of the perks of visiting remote places is that the people you meet are usually fellow travelers, not tourists. They've done their homework and, like you, are seeking out places away from the crowds and tourist traps. Zachary was a seasoned traveler, having roamed across the globe, so it was interesting to hear his impressions of Chang. "It's very nice to see this place now, before it gets overrun," he said, sounding very much like Arnold S. Travel and Leisure had recently anointed Chang the #2 tropical island paradise vacation spot in the world, the Maldives taking first place, effectively dropping KC onto the global tourist map with a glittering pin. As Oscar Wilde wrote, "Yet each man kills the thing he loves." There goes the neighborhood. Then again, I'm sure the island locals say that to themselves every time a van load of tourists tumbles out onto the street. Breakfast complete, Malaya and I set off across the sandy paths behind the resort, crossing a small, tastefully adorned Japanese-style arched bridge that spanned the narrow inlet. It was picturesque. Vibrantly painted family fishing boats lined the banks, moored with taut lines that hinted at rest rather than readiness. No one was heading out, not with New Year's Eve celebrations looming. The air was still, the only sounds coming from the exotic birds calling out from the trees and the faint swish of distant surf. New Year's Eve. Showered and dressed for an evening out, we were back at the beachfront bar for sunset. A few beers and a bourbon later, we bore witness to the sun as it dipped below the island-studded horizon. It was clocking out to avoid the coming madness. We headed into Kai Bay, now throbbing with life. Locals celebrating the holiday while travelers pretended not to be tourists, all elbowing through the same narrow two-lane main drag. Scooters wove through traffic while pedestrians mistakenly clogged the road. Tuk-tuks lit up with LED lights as the punch of subwoofers added to the cacophony with theatrical urgency. Songtas loaded with partiers rolled by like mobile karaoke booths. The whole scene had the barely controlled madness of a street fair thrown together by someone with a head injury, a love of neon, and a booming hip hop soundtrack. Every bar, shop, and restaurant had flung its doors wide open, music blaring, glowing with light, trying to outdo each other in some unspoken arms race of festivity. It was as if the entire village had been plugged into a mega generator and told to vibe. Malaya, who is Filipino and adores Southeast Asian seafood dishes, had gotten a recommendation for a Thai place called Bon Kai Bay Seafood. Family owned, of course, though to be fair, every square meter of Kai Bay was family owned. We found it quickly. The one with a boat out front absolutely packed to the gunwales with ice and today's catch. The fish and seafood laid out like runway models at a scaled and shelled casting call. We were ushered to the first available table and handed menus. Up front, manning the flat top, woks and pans the size of hubcaps, was a one-woman war zone. Grandma, barefoot, planted squarely on the cement floor like a general defending her stronghold, was at the helm. She didn't so much cook as command, issuing orders in rapid Thai while flipping fish, fried, and walking delectables from the boat, and somehow keeping mental tabs on sizzling pans, all while dancing back and forth to the flat top, which was giving off heat waves like a mirage in the Sahara. The family operation hummed around her like a beehive, scurrying children, grandchildren, nieces and nephews, and servers running food, taking orders, and absorbing her withering glances if anyone dared move too slowly. She looked like she hadn't stepped away from her post since the Clinton administration. The woman ran that restaurant with the tactical precision of a field marshal and the dead-eyed intensity of someone who'd seen things. Many things. We ordered like people who hadn't eaten in a week. The logic was sound. The bungalow had a refrigerator, and leftovers are future victories. So, with full confidence and only a whisper of shame, we deep dove full bore on the menu. There were prawns the size of a toddler's forearm, genetically destined for the flap top, their long antennae curling like confused punctuation. A whole red snapper got the nod for the fryer, along with clams and scallops headed for a wok baptism in chili and holy basil. We added fried spring rolls and a heap of stir-fried morning glory, because what's a New Year's meal without swamp greens? Garlic fried chicken something or another made the cut, mostly because it smelled amazing at the next table, and a mountain of fried rice came along for ballast. Our server, a polite teenage boy with the demeanor of someone used to Western over-ordering, blinked as the list grew longer. He nodded, scribbled, and took the bloated ticket to Grandma. She read it, squinted toward our table like she was trying to decide if we were serious, stupid, or just cruel, then muttered something sharp, probably along the lines of amateurs, and cranked the flames under the woks. The prawns hit the flap top with a hiss. She shook her head the whole time, but her hands and feet never stopped moving. Over the next 2 hours, we annihilated every dish like we were on an epic food-eating contest. I noticed Grandma, from time to time, peeking at us with what could only be described as a look of begrudging admiration. It's not every day someone tackles a menu like a locust swarm on a rampage. As the last bite of fried rice disappeared and I leaned back, stuffed to the brim, Malaya got a spark of inspiration. "I want to meet her," she declared, pointing at Grandma, who was finally sitting down at a table next to her cooking station, fanning herself like she'd just won the Iron Chef battle against Morimoto. Malaya approached with grace, admiration, and warmth, knowing full well she was about to steal a moment offering thanks for the meal. Grandma's eyes, which had been as blank as a monk in deep meditation, cracked into her biggest smile. She scooted over on the bench, patted the seat, and motioned for Malaya to join her like they'd been old pals all along. There it was. The shift from kitchen general to family matriarch. The mood lifted, and I was handed Malaya's phone to capture the moment held within that meet and greet moment. I snapped a few photos as they exchanged jokes in broken Tagalog and English, both of them laughing, though I suspected Grandma's laughter was 80% relief from a grueling night of cooking and 20% the joy of people who were so happily full they couldn't stand up. Photo duties done, I wandered outside, digesting both the food and the local vibe, which was a strange mix of people milling about in festive New Year's gear, while tuk-tuks revved past like they were auditioning for the Fast and Furious franchise. Walking back towards the hotel, we passed a non-touristy open front bar with rock and roll pouring into the street as booze poured into shot glasses. While the Jal Mui bar had a blender, that was a place for shooting shots, not sipping daiquiris. It reminded me of the reggae bar up in Chiang Rai, but with a grittier vibe. And as there was a pool table in back, we decided to shoot a game and enjoy the party vibe. Sometimes things don't turn out as intended. One game turned into five, with beers and shots of whiskey accompanying each round. The owner and his wife played doubles with us, boys against girls, and though I'm not a very good player, sometimes the angles lined up and we beat the ladies 3 out of 5. It was 11:15 p.m. and I wanted to see the new year turn its page on the beach, but Malaya wanted to stay and explore the town in party mode, so we split up. I called Charlie, and we had a lovely video chat time, bawling our eyes out to each other over screens. The pain of separation was lurid and desperate, even though we'd promised each other we'd be mature about it and wait until we were together again before losing it all over again. I got to see her mom and dad, who waved graciously and then quickly bowed out. And Ye popped in, looked at me on Charlie's screen, looked back at Charlie, then started firing off what I could only assume were, "What the hell is going on here?" questions. We kissed our cameras goodnight, wishing each other a truly happy new year. When I hung up, I'd never felt so alone. The Thais have a fondness for getting a buzz on, and in Thailand there are infinite ways to accomplish that. Spiritually, chemically, organically, there's no shortage of paths to altered states. With that in mind, there's a particular kind of fungi available if you were patient enough and asked the right questions of the right people. I learned those nuances in Bangkok. I had ended up alone at a small, unassuming street cart sidewalk table for dinner. I found myself within a party of 5 as two couples, plates in hand, looked for somewhere to sit. The tables were packed, so I invited them to join me. I don't remember how we ended up talking about magic mushrooms, but there we were, scarfing down plates of deliciousness, deep in a conversation about fungi. I was schooled in the art of finding what I was after by asking the right questions in the right way. Once you know where to go, how to behave, and, most importantly, how to ask, let's just say, if you're looking for it, you can get that. In my case, it was psilocybin. Magic mushrooms to microdose, clear out some mental cobwebs, and have a little fun as the year flipped over. The conversation raised a few eyebrows when I mentioned my monk days, but once I explained my prior life in San Francisco, they all nodded knowingly and filled in the gaps. A little shock was there, sure, but also some understanding. They pointed me in the right direction. What seemed, upon initial inspection, to have the same visual, aromatic, flavor, and texture as the shrooms back home, I thought to myself, sure, I'll have some trippy fun as the year turns over and giggle for a few hours. I know what these are, and here we go. At least, that's what I thought. Oops. 1 little gram chewed up and washed down with an iced beer. 30 minutes later, blammo! I felt like I was in an existential wrestling match with the universe. So completely different. Wave after wave, ebb and flow, hour after hour of intensity, like a roller coaster in the dark, where the earth is constantly shifting beneath you. One moment you think you're on the descent to normalcy, the next you're getting catapulted back upstairs towards some height of feeling and insight, only to plummet back down into the void. Friendly ghosts, dragons, and clowns took turns riding shotgun on my journey, their presence flickering in and out like some bizarre R. Crumb comic come to life. Every time I thought the ride was over, I was pulled into deeper, more alien territory, somewhere unknown, but welcoming, as if the mushrooms were opening doors to realms I had never even considered. And with every trip through the carnival ride, I realized this was not the same mushroom I had known before. The old acquaintance I thought I'd recognize from the clues was, in fact, an entirely different beast. Familiar elements, the spiraling, the intensity, the flickering lights and fits of giggles, but magnified, more potent, and with a depth that felt almost ancient. It was a lot to handle, like being told the truth about something you thought you understood, only to discover that the truth itself had no end. There was nothing gentle about it like I'd expected. This wasn't nostalgia or a simple trip. It was something else entirely, a force that moved through me with the kind of purpose that made the world feel smaller, yet infinitely bigger, all at once. It was New Year's Eve, and I was planted in the wraparound rattan chair on the grassy patio outside the bungalow, sipping Thai rum, riding a time-warping fungal wave on that dark Kai Bay beach. It was 11:30 p.m., December 31st, 2024. The beach in front of me was empty, peaceful, suspended in that quiet, anticipatory breath before the world turned over. I slipped in my wireless earbuds. Miraculous little things, considering that 30 years ago this kind of untethered technology would have seemed like witchcraft. I queued up the Grateful Dead's 1982 New Year's Eve show from the Oakland Auditorium. No hesitation. Off came the clothes. I padded naked down the sand, still warm from the day's sun, and waded out into the Gulf of Thailand. Skinny dipping in that velvet bath of salt water under an inky tropical sky, I felt like a blinking, half-lucid constellation myself. Small, suspended, somehow both ancient and brand new. At 10 to midnight, fireworks began popping off lazily from both ends of the bay. Someone somewhere was lighting fuses with a beer in hand. Within minutes, the amateur sparks gave way to full-scale industrial artillery, blasting enormous fire blooms across the night, flooding my vision from north to south. Jerry leaned into his solo on Midnight Hour, Wilson Pickett's anthem pulsing through my head, while streaks of color exploded in every direction. I howled with laughter, alone and elated, spinning in place like some salt-encrusted lunatic conducting a private ceremony to say farewell to a strange, magnificent, bewildering year. Goodbye, 2024. You didn't go quietly, but damn if you didn't leave a mark. The highs were epic, the lows devastating. It was early as I gazed out the glass wall of our room. The dawning of the new year revealed a cloud-covered sky and choppy, white-capped seas. This was less than ideal given that we were going snorkeling. Not the relaxing, glassy sea serene day we'd had in mind. We had booked an all-day snorkeling tour with Mr. Kahai's dive operation through our hotel, which would depart for the southern islands within the Maritime National Park from Bang Bao Pier, on the southwestern coast of Chang. The plan on paper was to cruise a 2.5 hour boat ride down to islands and reefs. Now it would be 2.5 hours of churning through chop, spray splashing over every crest. Absolutely nothing about that sounded appealing. It was clear that the universe had a sick sense of humor. That kind of humor that insists you start your new year drenched in sea spray while your stomach has a quiet but firm conversation with gravity. The tour company, of course, made sure we felt the full brunt of this adventure. They sent an open-air Toyota pickup truck with bench seats along the sides and the bed to pick us up at the hotel. The truck was packed to capacity with a mix of hungover and bedraggled souls. It was 8 a.m., and we were on the road south, heading toward the dock. From talking to some locals about our plan, I knew the road to the pier was hillier and twistier than the one we'd taken to Kai Bay. A relentless wind blew through everything, amplifying the remnants of last night's shrooms and rum shots. It was shaping up to be a day to remember. Bangbao was the quintessential isolated fishing port, the kind of place you picture when you imagine life on the water. Boats of all shapes and sizes, from the sleek charter yachts to humble netcasters, to work-worn commercial vessels, were moored side by side, each one showcasing their unique story of saltwater and toil. Nets draped over rails like yesterday's laundry, swayed in the wind. Everything smelled of brine, seaweed, and the ocean's bounty. The village, built on stilts over the water, was the kind of place you'd find on a blog. The market stalls promising fresh fish, fruits, veggies, and trinkets looked as if they'd been plucked right out of a picture book. The sort of place where everyone knew each other, where a shared community rhythm set the pace. But of course, we arrived on New Year's Day, forgetting that even fishing villages have the decency to pause when the year turns. Most of the vendors were either home nursing hangovers, still drinking, or simply enjoying the holiday with some well-earned time off. Yep, 90% of the stalls were empty and shuttered tight. Still, the docks had their charm as salty air carried the music of ocean, the soundtrack to the lengthy stroll to get to our vessel. We were tantalized by the promise of the islands ahead. Ko Yak, Ko Lon, Ko Maping, each one a tiny islet with reefs to explore. But the real oddball on the itinerary was Hat Sanjiao, a beach known for its peculiar shrine, adorned with hundreds of ceramic chicken statues. That was something I couldn't pass up. I don't know why, but it seemed kooky enough to warrant time. Maybe it was the remnants of too many weird offbeat encounters that had made me appreciate the quirky side of the world, but I was already picturing the photos I'd take. If there was one thing I knew, it was that oddities like that don't show up every day. Reaching our boat at the far end of Bang Bao Pier, it felt further than it was. A slow, quiet walk along the cement spine that stretched a kilometer and a half into the harbor. The usual clatter and energy of the market was nowhere to be found. It felt like the whole place had exhaled, as if the celebrations of the night before were still echoing faintly in the rafters. There was one woman tending her stall, sweeping lazily and rearranging a few things with the half-hearted rhythm of someone easing into the day. I asked her if it was always this sleepy. She gave a small laugh, shaking her head. "Holiday," she said simply. "Still sleeping. Maybe still drinking." Her smile was thin, not unkind, but with weariness you sometimes see in people who keep things running while the rest of the world continues to make bad decisions. She brightened as she encouraged us to come back after the boat trip, gesturing toward her shop filled with all the usual offerings: elephant pants, knockoff brand sunglasses, keychains, kitschy t-shirts, fat-bellied Buddhas with a waving arm, and beach gear. It was all there, waiting for someone with a little leftover celebration money and nowhere else to be. I nodded and said we'd return after snorkeling. I wasn't sure if we actually would. I meant it in the way you sometimes mean things when you want to leave goodwill behind, even if your feet are already moving on. She followed my gaze out to the sea. Even inside the shelter of the harbor, the water was restless. She gave a small frown and then said softly, "Be careful." It wasn't dramatic, just a simple gesture, one human passing concern to another. I thanked her, and for a moment I felt the tug of quiet obligation. maybe we would stop by on the way back after all. At the end of that long pier, there was a stubby classic red and white lighthouse that wouldn't be out of place on a rugged New England coastline. It was as picturesque as you could want, straight out of a central casting for Seaside Village at dawn. Requisite photos taken, we walked back 50 yards or so to where many of the dive and snorkeling boats were moored, most of them tied too deep like they were spooning. With the help of a sun-baked, swarthy-looking crew, though all of them to a man had the Thai warmth with smiles plastered to their faces, we climbed onto the first boat, passed through, then onto the second. Ours was a large wooden vessel, the main deck outfitted with booth-style benches facing each other, and a main cabin set squarely in the middle. Down the center ran a tall, narrow table, useful for lunch or communal seasickness, depending on the day. Today might very well be the latter. Up a narrow ladder at the bow, the upper deck had reclined wooden seats facing forward, shaded by a circus tent awning that looked like it had been through a few monsoons but still did the trick. It was a wacky boat, tall with curved high-rising chines and every inch slathered in red, gold, and green paint, as if someone had handed the job to a candy cane enthusiast on Adderall. Overhead rails on the main deck were strung with 100 orange life vests, swaying slightly as the boat rocked in the swell, a not-so-subtle reminder of why they were there. The boat was two-thirds full, with 70 passengers and 10 crewmen aboard. As we made our way past the breakwater jetty, we immediately felt rougher seas and knew it was going to be a long ride. Thank goodness I don't get seasick. As we entered deeper water, it got rougher with the white-capped crests continuously spraying over the gunwales. The clouds blew through, giving way to a sunny day. 2.5 hours of stomach-churning nautical travel later, we arrived at the small islands on the east side of Koh Rung. We had to stop in and pay the national park fee, and though I wanted to get in the water, sitting in the lee of the island allowed for some of the amusement park perpetual motion to die down a bit. Our first snorkeling stop was in the lee of Koh Yak, which is listed as an island, but that's being more than charitable. It was more of an rocky outcrop, rising 15 feet above sea level, about the size of a convenience store parking lot. Fins, mask, and snorkel on, I made a not very graceful descent down the ladder and slipped into the water. I swam toward the rocks only to find the choppy sea turning snorkeling into more of a washing machine rinse cycle. The sea kept flooding my tube as I was tossed about like laundry. I flippered back to the boat to grab a life vest. I was floating and didn't have to think about anything except keeping my face down and letting the ocean bounce me about like a cork. A few kicks got me up near the rocks where the surge calmed slightly, and when I looked down, I was suddenly hungry. The ledges below were covered in black sea urchins. Thousands of them. Uni. All I needed was a knife and some sake, and I'd have myself a 5-star sashimi lunch. But alas, national park. No harvesting allowed. There were a few colorful fish darting around, though schools might be too generous. More like post-class math club groups, 5 or 10 at most. A couple of black and green angelfish hovered about. But this wasn't exactly a reef teeming with life. Still, I floated and watched what was there until I noticed most of the other passengers heading back to the boat. On to the next island. Koh Lone was a bit larger, with a crescent arc that cradled us against the chop. It offered more protection and better snorkeling. We had a little longer there, so I swam back and forth between both horns, checking out the marine life along the way. It was livelier, more species, more movement. Schools of little cleaner raceae flitted about, happily nibbling at any exposed skin they could find. These are the same fish used in those foot spa tanks, where tourists dangle their feet and let the fish exfoliate all the dead skin off. An all organic pedicure. On big reefs, cleaner Rase set up what are essentially underwater spas. Cleaning stations where larger species like groupers, turtles, rays, and sharks come to get a good scrub. There's an observable detente in place. You clean me up, polish between my teeth, get the parasites off my gills, and I won't eat you. A kind of mutual respect forged in the name of hygiene. I was out for quite a while cruising back and forth along the rock face of Cologne, enjoying the triggerfish, bannerfish, clownfish, cleaneracea, a giant grouper, an orange grouper, a porcupine fish, a small moray eel hovering in a crevice eyeing me back, anemones and starfish covering the floor and rock faces. Though it was still choppy water, I was much happier with the fauna, so the time passed without me paying too much attention to how long I was swimming about. I hadn't come across any other swimmers for a while, so I poked my head up to see where everyone was. But when I looked at where the boat had been, it was gone. I watched as the ass end sailed away. I uprighted myself to tread water, ripped the mast down, frantically waved my arm, and began shouting as I saw smoke billowing out the stack up top. After a few minutes of me treading water and waving, I began to wonder about climbing up the rocks to live as a castaway, except there wasn't even a coconut palm on the island. Fish by hand? Learn to be a savage? It rained enough that I could find a natural rock cistern, and Buddha knows I love sushi. As my monkey mind rapidly spun through my options, the boat began to pivot on its axis and slowly reverse its course backwards, closer to Koh Rung, but still within the lee side of the island. I realized they were repositioning the craft to take over a mooring buoy a few spots closer to the island. I took some deep breaths and slowly closed my eyes, slipping into meditation mode as I bobbed and calmed myself down. After I got my mask and snorkel back in place, I swam over to the boat, still a little shaken. When I got to the ladder, I looked up to see a dark, broad, smiling face and crazy, unkempt hair of one of the crew beaming down at me, extending his hand to help me aboard. As I gained the deck and took off the flippers, he laughed and said, "You know, man, we could see your vest and fins, and we haven't lost a paying customer in over a week." Very fucking funny. I took off the rest of the gear and sat on a bench in the sun and closed my eyes, letting the rays bake the salt into my skin. I was getting my heart rate back to normal when he reappeared with a small bottle of rum. I took a long swig, handed it back, and said thanks as he retreated, snickering, still finding his joke funny. I sat in the sunniest place I could find, letting the rays and the rum do their job. Koma Pring was the last little outcrop on the day's snorkeling circuit before we'd tie up to a floating pontoon dock and head ashore to explore the mysterious chicken shrine. Again, calling Koma Pring an island felt generous. It was really more of a lumpy pile of rocks with aspirations. But because of its proximity to the much larger Koh Rong, the swim was short, the water was calm, and the fish population was, at least in relative terms, abundant. It was the easiest swim of the day and made for a pleasant snorkel. I drifted over small groups of reef fish darting around, colorful and curious. Still, I kept hoping for a bit more magic. Maybe a curious cuttlefish flashing its ever-shifting alien camouflage, or a shy reef shark gliding past like a shadow. Even a mellow turtle would have done. Turtles make excellent snorkeling companions when they're feeling social, swimming slowly and allowing you to track beside them like a loyal sidekick. But no dice. Just the usual suspects I'd seen at the previous stops. After a while, I gave up the search, kicked gently to shore, and plopped down on the sand. I lay there, head cocked sideways, trying to drain the sea from my ears, sun warming my back, trying to recalibrate my expectations. It had been a good day, but not the kind of ocean communion I've felt in the Cook Islands or around St. John in the Caribbean, where the reef wraps around you like a warm embrace and the fish seem to accept you as one of their own. This was not that. Still, the rum helped. The beach at Koh Rong was easy on the eyes. Soft sand, filtered sunlight, a sense of hush. The so-called chicken shrine, however, was, well, let's call it modest. A squat little structure about the size of a backyard playhouse had been recently given a thick coat of paint, the only thing holding its cracked plaster together. A miniature wrought iron fence that was both battered and rusted protected an interesting outdoor display of ceramic poultry. Maybe 100 small statues of chickens clustered inside and on the stoop, as if waiting for instructions. And that was it. I tilted my head, gave it a once over, and thought, huh. The boat ride back was uneventful in the way that only a drawn out, sun banked slog across wind chopped seas can be. We set sail around 2 p.m., embarking on what was billed as a 2-hour tour, which felt oddly familiar and vaguely ominous. After a day of midland snorkeling and an offbeat visit to a shrine of ceramic chickens, I was more than ready to call it a day. The seas were still stirred up and white-capped, and the boat pitched and rolled like a carnival ride. Every crest brought a fresh spray and the dull ache of anticipation, of land, of stillness. It wasn't rough enough to be dramatic, just irritating enough to make you count the minutes to mooring up. Time bent and stretched in a way that only happens when your swimsuit is clammy, your stomach is unsettled, and there's nowhere to go but wherever that thing is taking you. By the time the pier crept back into view, I had aged. Not much, but just enough to need a cold drink and a long walk far away from anything that floats. As we docked, I was looking forward to a hot shower and the reassuring steadiness of land underfoot. We strolled back along the long pier through the stilt village, and though a few more vendors had opened up since morning, it still wasn't bustling. We passed by the woman's stall only to find it shuttered and silent. She'd packed up and gone home for the day. Maybe she hadn't expected us to survive. Malaya and I wanted to stay at Bang Bao for dinner at one of the seafood restaurants on the dock, as they were all supposed to be excellent, but we had to make our way back up the road to meet our Song Tao for the return ride to Kai Bay Grand View. So, fresh fish and sunset beers on stilts would have to wait for another trip. Our ride was parked a kilometer up the road past the end of the pier. We climbed in the back with the other sun-dazed passengers and started the winding journey back, weaving through the outskirts of the village. After a 10-minute drive, we pulled into a small roadside resort to let some folks off. A few cars were parked in the lot, but everyone, guests, staff, even the driver, were looking up into the trees across the road. There, on the crossbar of a power pole, a trio of silvered langur monkeys lounged like furry electricians on a coffee break. They were watching the people who were watching them, and the whole thing felt quietly surreal. A little roadside mutual admiration society. We only stayed for a few minutes before rolling on, but it was worth the pause to see those mellow-eyed creatures just hanging out, as if that was a scheduled performance. But as we pulled back onto the road, disaster. We tucked in behind a very slow and extremely smelly trash truck. It reeked of diesel, summer-heated outhouse, and rotting fish. An olfactory cocktail that hit us like a brick wall. The road twisted and climbed through the hills, with blind turns every 100 feet or so, making it impossible to pass. There we were, trapped in a diesel-scented wake of Hades-inspired decay, gagging and gasping with every breath. The truck belched fumes. Our driver stayed close behind, inching forward at every curve, hoping a view would open up with enough distance and freedom to pass the disgusting leader, now trailing a long line of vehicles behind. After what felt like an eternity in a mobile version of the underworld, the garbage truck finally pulled to the side, the long, patient line of cars that had stacked up behind us all darting past him, everyone's face green with nausea. I must say that I must be considerate of the driver, and just in time, too, as my ability to suppress my gag reflex was hanging on by a very thin thread. Finally able to breathe again, we made it back to our place and took long, hot showers, not just to get the salt crust off, but to try and erase the stench of the trash truck, which may still hold the title for foulest thing I've ever smelled. Clean and refreshed with a hearty swig of rum, I actually gargled the stuff, to help wash away the lingering memory, we headed into town. Passing the beach bar, we figured it would be a waste of perfectly good steps not to pop in for a few libations and recap the day. We agreed that on a calm, hot day with glassy seas and tranquil dive spots, the whole experience would have hit differently. But, well, you can schedule a dive. You can't schedule the weather. Such is life. We turned south along the beach, strolling through the mid tide's warm shallows, because just past the end of the property was an open air bar restaurant called Porn's. Yes, really. Malaya had spotted it during one of her swims and wanted to check it out, so off we went to see what the place was all about. It was the kind of beach spot you hope to stumble across: thick, worn teak poles and floorboards, a thatched roof that had entire communities of geckos eating the bugs that would otherwise be swarming, and a breezy, nothing to prove, very rustic charm. We grabbed a corner table right at the edge, where wavelets lapped at the rock bulkheads below our feet. Fried chicken, fried spring rolls, and a few seared giant prawns showed up alongside a couple of cold beers. Our late lunch was nothing short of fantastic. There's something about the way the Thais fry chicken that's just magic. No thick batter, no grease bombs, just a whisper of crisp, crackly skin and perfect seasoning. It puts every fast food chain you've ever known to absolute shame. But something was amiss. I hadn't heard back from Charlie since last night. Hungover? She wasn't much of a drinker, so I doubted that. Probably just busy with family grilling her over her farang entanglement. Still, something wasn't feeling right. We got back from Porn's and headed towards town, but not before a stop at the beach bar. After a second round, I convinced Malaya to join me for dinner at El Barrio. Even though she doesn't prefer Mexican food, my rave reviews encouraged her to relent, come meet Julian, and enjoy some ceviche and tequila. We wrapped things up and headed into town, and as soon as she walked into El Barrio and saw the murals and real Mexican terracotta plates and bowls and Talavera tiles, she was impressed. The place was packed, every table full of partying vacationers oohing and awing over the food and margaritas. Julian gave me an enthusiastic welcome back and told us to wait at the bar until the table opened up. Malaya is fluent in Spanish, so she and Julian started chatting away, swapping stories as she shared pics of her on her phone from her recent trip to Mexico City. I got me some satisfaction. She admitted El Barrios was true to Mexico. The food and drink were great, as she ate more of my ceviche. I had one of her tacos, and it was fantastic. The fresh tortillas and salsas also made her think twice, which made the effort worthwhile. Wrapping up, Julian gave us more shots of his fruit infused tequila as we said fond farewells. Someday, when I go back to Chang, I will definitely be heading back to El Barrio. We strolled along the main street for a little while, then headed back to the pool bar. As is often the case, the ambiance was different with a different clientele than on New Year's Eve. We still had fun with the owner and his wife, but there were some other patrons who were very loud and obnoxious that were driving us both crazy. After only 2 games, we decided to call it a night and bid our farewells, then headed back to our bungalow for our last night on Chang. More silence from Charlie. I reached out to Jax. They must have been on a family outing. The return trip from Chang wasn't nearly as quick as our flight down. Malaya had been fast and efficient arranging the getaway, booked us a smooth 45-minute hop along south on Bangkok Airways. But coming back? Different story. The post New Year's crush had emptied the skies of return seats, so we booked a van through Chang Transport. Door to door, they said. What they didn't say was 9 hours of slow motion endurance, from beachside bliss back to city blitz, ending at the Courtyard Marriott on Sukhumvit Soi 21. You'd think a 9-hour van ride would be the choice of the desperate or uninformed. But no, it was the only option, and we weren't alone. The van was packed. Every seat was filled, including the one up front, normally reserved for an extra employee with GPS. Couples, solo travelers, we were all headed to different corners of the city, but yoked to a shared itinerary. Drop-offs dictated by luck and geography. If it had been just us, 6 hours. That would have been easy. But it wasn't just us. And of course, we were last. Still, the journey wasn't without its merits. As the van rolled north from Trot, past sleepy villages, the landscape began to shift. The air grew earthier. Tourists thinned out. And through the van windows, Thailand revealed something quieter, older, more lived in, more honest. We drove through Chatumburi, with its endless fruit orchards, big open barns, and roadside tables sagging under piles of durian, rambutan, longkong, and mangosteen. Entire families worked the land as barefoot kids chased chickens, workers packed boxes for distribution, grandmothers squatting in the shade of broad banana leaves while fathers sharpened machetes under bamboo lean-tos. Life wasn't social media ready there. It was simply lived with the daily pace of agriculture. Then came Chonburi. Rice paddies, coconut groves, banana plantations. Everything growing, growing, growing. Green stretched on with the light of insistence. Bright, unbothered, unrepentant, or pretentious. This was Thailand stripped of gloss. No welcome drinks, no monks posing reluctantly for reels, no foreigners trying to out-zen each other in elephant pants. Just people, farming, living, minding their water buffalo, waiting for the rains. It was a kind of beauty that doesn't care if you notice. We passed into Sumut Prakan next, approaching Bangkok's orbit, but still anchored to the old ways. Canals crisscrossing, stilted wooden homes, pandan thickets swallowing fence lines, temple spires rising gently behind banana tree clusters. Fishermen mended nets roadside, same as it ever was. As I found myself leaning into the window more and more, craving the ordinariness of it all, I wasn't ready to be plugged back in. I was also profoundly relieved no one in the van had plans to be dropped off in Pattaya. That town of neon sins and crumpled expats is a different kind of real. A sweaty, desperate dream where the music never stops, the beer is always cheap, and prepaid heartbreak is part of the package. It's a place for losing track of time, and sometimes yourself.